15 acres of still water, behind a village of a few hundred people, in the middle of west-central Wisconsin. On paper, this is one of the smallest places I have ever walked. But this little Millpond has watched a glacial flood rearrange the state, 2 railroads collide in the grass behind it, a boom town rise and then quietly shrink, and a hometown soldier earn the Medal of Honor half a world away. The map calls it Oakwood Lake. The older records call it the Upper Merrillan Pond. Small water, deep history. Take a short walk with me. We are in Merrillan, a village in Jackson County, Wisconsin, up in the northern corner of the county where the farm fields meet the sand country. 3 highways thread through this one small grid of streets: Wisconsin Highway 95, U.S. Highway 12, and Highway 27. The county seat at Black River Falls lies a short drive to the southwest, and the city of Eau Claire sits farther off to the northwest. The village covers barely more than a square mile, at about 930 feet above sea level. 562 people called it home at the last census. And at the edge of town, Halls Creek pauses behind a dam and becomes the pond we are walking today. It is the 24th of May, a Saturday afternoon at the tail end of a Wisconsin spring, and the light already has that long golden slant to it. The street that carries us to the water is called Mill Street, and street names in old Wisconsin towns are rarely poetry, they are usually receipts. Mill Street means there was a mill. The leaves are new, the grass is thick, and the pond opens up ahead without ceremony. No entrance gate, no visitor center. Just a village and its water, the way it has been for a century and a half. The dam at the foot of this pond appears in the federal place name registers as the Merrillan Mills Dam, and that name is the whole story in 3 words. Somebody dammed Halls Creek here to put its water to work, and the pond behind the dam is the leftover machine. The state lists Oakwood Lake at 15 acres, with a maximum depth of about 13 feet. Its second official name, the Upper Merrillan Pond, quietly implies a lower one, and sure enough, another small dam sits downstream on the same creek. Wisconsin is scattered with ponds like this, built for work and inherited for pleasure. This one just happens to have kept both of its names. The water is nearly still this afternoon, and the far shore is close enough that you could shout across it. That is the intimacy of a mill pond. It is a lake at conversation scale. Spring runoff has the creek moving underneath all this calm, sliding toward the dam. Backyards come right down toward the water on the village side. Nobody designed this shoreline for tourists, and honestly, that is its charm. The stream that feeds all of this is Halls Creek, and it arrives at Merrillan like a hand closing into a fist. An east fork comes down from the north, a south fork joins below, and the main branch gathers them in as it swings past the village. These are modest streams, the kind you could step across in a dry August. But modest streams are exactly what millwrights wanted, because a small creek with a steady fall can be dammed cheaply and controlled easily. Halls Creek gave Merrillan its water power, its pond, and its fishing. Not bad for a creek most maps barely bother to label. Follow the water out of this pond and you are on a long ride. Hall's Creek runs out of Merrillan and folds into the Black River, the dark tannin-stained river that gave the county seat its name. The Black River then swings down through the sand country and the driftless hills until it meets the Mississippi at La Crosse. So a raindrop that falls on this quiet pond is, in the end, bound for the Gulf. Every Millpond is a comma in a much longer sentence. This one just reads quieter than most. Down by the outlet you can hear the pond ending, that steady wash of water finding the creek again below the dam. Stand here a moment because everything around you is younger than it looks. The pond is a human century and a half old. The creek is older, but the ground itself, the sand under the grass, the flatness away to the east that took a catastrophe to make. To understand this little pond, we have to talk about the biggest lake Wisconsin ever had. Around 18,000 years ago, a lobe of the Great Ice Sheet shoved down across eastern Wisconsin and jammed itself against the Baraboo Hills, corking the valley of the Wisconsin River. The water had nowhere to go, so it pooled into a monster called Glacial Lake, Wisconsin. At its height, the lake spread over an area roughly 8 times the size of modern Lake Winnebago and reached depths of 160 feet. It stretched north beyond where Wisconsin Rapids stands today, cold, gray, and rimmed with ice. It lasted about 4,000 years, and the country east and south of Merrillan spent much of that time as lakebed and lakeshore. Then, about 14,000 years ago, the cork failed. A warming climate rotted the ice dam at the Baraboo Hills. The lake found its old outlet, and most of Glacial Lake, Wisconsin drained in a catastrophic rush. Geologists believe the bulk of it left in a matter of weeks, possibly days. The escaping torrent sawed through soft Cambrian sandstone and carved the dells of the Wisconsin River, the gorge tourists float through today. What the lake left behind was its floor, a vast apron of flat sand across central Wisconsin. Islands that once stood in the lake survive as lonely sandstone buttes like Mill Bluff and Rocha Cry. One drained lake, an entire scenery. Back on the path, look at what is growing here: oaks, pines, the trees of sandy, fast-draining ground. Soil is memory, and this soil remembers moving water. Every step on this trail lands on sediment that has been sorted and resorted for thousands of years. The pond, by comparison, is a newcomer. The land it sits in was finished long before anyone thought to dam a creek. Merrillan sits close to a great seam in the Wisconsin landscape. Away to the east lies the flat sandy plain the Glacial Lake left behind, a country of jack pine, scrub oak, and marsh that today holds the Black River State Forest. Off to the west and south, the land wrinkles into the driftless country, the famous corner of the state the ice sheets never flattened. The village lives near the hinge between the two, on ground shaped more by water than by ice. That is why the horizon here can feel flat in one direction and hilly in another. Read the land, and you can almost see the old shoreline. From the water's edge, you can see how the village and the pond hold on to each other. A few streets, a water tower, and then the country opens out again in every direction. It is hard, standing here, to imagine this as a place of noise and smoke and commerce. But that is exactly what it was. The quiet is recent. Let me take you back to when this pond was the newest thing in a brand new town. In the middle of the 1800s, the rivers of this region ran on lumber. The Black River Valley was one of Wisconsin's early logging arteries, floating white pine downstream to mills and markets, and the countryside around it filled in with camps, sawmills, and supply towns. Water powered the first mills, which is exactly why a creek with a good dam site mattered. A pond like this one could store logs, turn a saw, and grind grain for the families who followed the loggers in. The pine did not last, it never does, but the towns the pine paid for stayed on the map. The village takes its name from L.G. Merrill, an original owner of the town site. Merrillan is simply his surname with a flourish on the end, and it appeared on plats and timetables as the rails approached in the early 1870s. Naming a town for its proprietor was standard practice on the frontier, because a town site was a business venture before it was a home. Merrill was betting that this exact spot, where a creek could be dammed and two lines of railroad survey stakes were converging, would be worth something. He was right, at least for a while. The village still carries his name a century and a half later. Walking above the dam, you are walking the reason the village exists at all. Water power came first, and then something bigger found this spot. In the early 1870s, surveyors' stakes marched toward this creek from two directions at once. One line was coming from the east, from Green Bay. Another was coming up from the south, bound for the cities of the Northwest. Where they crossed, a town was inevitable. The railroad that put Merrillan on the timetable was the Green Bay and Lake Pepin. A line with a simple, audacious plan lay tracked straight across Wisconsin from Green Bay to the Mississippi River. Its crews worked west through the woods and marshes, and in January of 1873, the rails from Wisconsin Rapids reached Merrillan. By December of that same year, the line had pushed on west to Arcadia. In 1883, it finally touched the Mississippi across from Winona, and its trains later ran into Winona itself over a bridge company's tracks. The dream took a decade and several reorganizations, but the little village by the Millpond got its trains in year one. What made Merrillan more than a whistle stop was the crossing. The East and West Green Bay Road met the North and South Line here, the route tying the Chicago and Northwestern system at Elray to the cities of the Upper Country, and beyond them, St. Paul. That North and South Line had a rough start. Its builder, the West Wisconsin Railway, went bankrupt and was swept up in 1878 by the Chicago, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and Omaha Railway, the storied Omaha Road. A junction town lives differently than a line town. Passengers change trains, freight changes hands and hotels, eating houses, and rail crews follow. For a few decades, this quiet grid of streets was a place you passed through on the way to almost anywhere. It is worth letting the size of that sink in as we walk. A junction in the 1870s was what an interstate exit and a fiber hub are today, rolled into one. Merrillan was suddenly connected to Green Bay, to the Mississippi, to St. Paul, to Chicago by way of El Rey. Farm produce, lumber, mail, and travelers all funneled through this one small grid of streets. The pond watched all of it from the edge of town. The census of 1880 caught Merrillan at its high water mark, 1,003 residents, nearly double what the village counts today. Think about what that number means. More families, more storefronts, more church pews and school desks than the modern village needs. Boom numbers like that came from the overlap of everything at once. The mills running, the junction busy, the countryside still filling with settlers. Then the timber thinned, the railroads consolidated, and the arithmetic slowly reversed. The town that remains is not a failure, it is the durable core of a boom. Walk these banks and you are walking through the boom's leftovers, softened by grass. Somewhere near here stood the works that gave Mill Street its name. Ponds like this were never ornamental. Every acre of this water once had a job. It is one of my favorite things about small Wisconsin towns. Their prettiest features are usually retired machinery. It is worth pausing on what a millpond actually did, because ponds like this were the batteries of the 19th century. The dam stored energy all night so the wheel or turbine could spin it all day, sawing lumber or grinding feed. In winter, ponds across the region turned one more profit when crews scored and sawed the ice into blocks and packed it in sawdust to cool the summer ahead. Children skated on the factory floor, so to speak. When steam and then electricity arrived, the ponds lost their jobs but kept their water, which is why so many Wisconsin villages, this one included, come with a lake attached. From here you can look downstream, the direction all this water is quietly headed. Hall's Creek leaves the pond without any drama and disappears into the trees toward the Black River. Down that same corridor went the logs, the lumber, and eventually the young people chasing bigger towns. Rivers in Wisconsin always doubled as roads. This one is small, but it pointed the same direction as all the others out away and toward the Mississippi. Remember that the state calls this the Upper Merrillan Pond. Downstream on Hall's Creek sits a second dam that carries the name of the Troe family, and Troe is a name you can also find on the roll of Wisconsin state legislators, attached to this small village. Another Merrillan man, Frederick Condit, sat in the legislature for the Greenback Party, the 1870s movement of farmers and workers who wanted paper money kept in circulation. Small towns like this one were never as sleepy as they look. They sent lumber down the creeks, freight down the rails, and opinions down to Madison. The pond names are just the part of that history that still holds water. There is one more story here, and it is the one I would drive out of my way to tell. It does not belong to the dam or the railroads, but to a family from this countryside. Villages this size usually lend their names to timetables and county maps and little else. Merrillan's name is attached to something much larger. It rides on a Navy ship, and it stood over a camp in Korea for half a century. One story from this village deserves to be told wherever its name travels. Mitchell Red Cloud Jr., a member of the Ho-Chunk Nation, whose people have deep roots in this county, was born in nearby Hatfield in 1925 and enlisted in the Marines from Merrillan as a teenager. He fought with the Marine Raiders on Guadalcanal, was wounded on Okinawa, and after the war joined the Army. On the night of November 5, 1950 in Korea, he was the first to detect a mass surprise attack, and though shot at least 8 times, he had himself braced upright against a tree so he could keep firing and his company held. He died there, 25 years old, and received the Medal of Honor. A camp in Korea and a Navy ship have carried his name, and so, quietly, does this corner of Wisconsin. Back at the water, the evening is settling in and the pond has gone to glass again. Hold that last story a moment before we move on. Places do not get to choose what history asks of their people. A village this small gave that much. It seems right that the water here is calm. Today, the state fish managers know this pond as honest, small water. Largemouth bass are common, panfish hold in the weedy margins, and a little surprisingly for a millpond, trout are present too, a gift from the cold creek that feeds it. 13 feet of depth is enough to carry fish through a Wisconsin winter. There is public land within a stone's throw of the shoreline, so this is anybody's lake. No guide boats, no rental docks, no crowds. Just a farm country pond doing quiet, steady work, the way it always has. Here is the quirk I promised you. In 2019, SpaceX filed applications with federal regulators to build a Starlink satellite ground station in Merrillan, siting it at an existing fiber optic cable location, which means this village of a few hundred, born because 2 iron roads crossed here in the 1870s, was chosen again, this time because invisible roads of glass fiber cross here too. Junction towns stay junction towns, only the cargo changes. Lumber, then freight and passengers, then data from orbit. The pond has seen every era of it come and go. The sun is getting low now, and May light in Wisconsin goes to gold like nowhere else. The frogs and the birds are tuning up along the banks. A few minutes of walking covers this whole stretch of shoreline, and yet we have crossed 18,000 years to get here. That is the trick small places play on you. They are quick to walk and slow to leave. Merrillan today is 562 people, 1 elementary school, 3 highways, and this pond. The trains that made it are mostly memory, the mills are gone, and the census has drifted gently down for a century. But shrinking is not the same as vanishing. The village keeps its water, its name, and its stories, the glacial flood, the crossing rails, the boom year census, the soldier who enlisted from these streets. Places like this hold the state's history in miniature, one small pond at a time. We came looking for a lake called Oakwood and found a mill pond with 2 names and 150 years of stories. That is the trade this channel loves best: a short walk, a small place, and a long memory. If you are ever crossing Wisconsin on Highway 12, give Merrillan a few minutes of your day and see this pond for yourself. Thank you for watching. Follow for more of the trails of the world.